The calm before the storm. The night air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of rain as Anthony Cole parked his black sedan outside a small diner on the city's outskirts. Anthony was a decorated FBI agent, known for his unwavering dedication and meticulous approach to justice. Tonight, however, he wasn't here on official business. He was meeting an informant, a nervous young man who claimed to have evidence implicating a prominent city councilman in a sprawling corruption scheme. Anthony checked his watch. Midnight. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional car speeding past. Inside the diner, a lone waitress refilled coffee cups for a pair of truckers. Anthony adjusted his navy suit and scanned the area. The informant had chosen a public spot to avoid suspicion, but the tension in the air was palpable. The bell above the door jingled as a young man in a hoodie stepped inside. He looked around nervously before spotting Anthony and hesitantly approaching. "You're Agent Cole?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled as he slid into the booth across from Anthony. "That's me," Anthony replied calmly, his sharp eyes studying the man. "You must be Sam." Sam nodded, pulling a small USB drive from his pocket. "I don't know how much time I have before they figure out I'm talking to you. This has everything. Documents, recordings, emails. It's all there. Councilman Hargrove isn't just corrupt. He's dangerous." Anthony's brow furrowed. Councilman Hargrove was a public figure with a sterling reputation, a man who campaigned on promises of transparency and reform. Yet the whispers of a darker reality had been growing louder for months. Before Anthony could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside snapped his attention to the window. The black SUV skidded to a stop, and 4 men in dark clothing emerged, their movements swift and purposeful. "Get down," Anthony hissed, pulling Sam to the floor just as a burst of gunfire shattered the diner's front windows. The waitress and truckers screamed, diving for cover behind the counter. Anthony drew his weapon, his training kicking in. "Stay low and don't move," he ordered Sam before peering over the edge of the booth. The attackers were advancing, their weapons trained on the building. "FBI," Anthony shouted, aiming and firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the hood of the SUV. The men hesitated but didn't retreat. Their precision and coordination told Anthony one thing: these weren't amateurs. Sam's voice trembled. "They're here for me. They know I talked." Anthony gritted his teeth. "Not on my watch." He reached for his phone, dialing for backup while keeping his weapon trained on the entrance. The attackers fanned out, 2 heading for the side entrance. Anthony knew he had to act fast. He grabbed Sam by the arm and guided him toward the kitchen at the back of the diner. "Stay close," he ordered. The kitchen door burst open as one of the attackers stepped inside. Anthony reacted instantly, disarming the man with a swift motion and knocking him unconscious. He grabbed the man's radio, tuning in to their frequency. "Target is on the move," a voice crackled. "Intercept at the rear." Anthony cursed under his breath. The attackers had them boxed in. "Sam, take this," Anthony said, handing him the USB drive. "Whatever happens, don't let this fall into their hands." Sam's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll handle them." "You get out of here." Anthony pointed to the back door. "There's an alley. Run to the end and flag down the first patrol car you see." Sam hesitated, but the resolve in Anthony's eyes left no room for argument. Nodding, he bolted for the door just as another attacker stormed in. Anthony fired, the shot grazing the man's arm and forcing him to retreat. The alley was narrow and dimly lit, offering Sam a fleeting chance to escape. Anthony stayed behind, holding off the remaining attackers with precision shots that pinned them down. He heard Sam's footsteps fade into the distance and allowed himself a moment of relief. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in his shoulder as a bullet grazed him. He ducked behind a metal counter, clutching his wound. The attackers were relentless, their gunfire deafening in the confined space. But Anthony was nothing if not resourceful. Spotting a fire extinguisher on the wall, He aimed and shot at its base, sending a cloud of white foam erupting into the room. The attackers coughed and stumbled, their vision obscured. Anthony seized the opportunity to disarm another assailant before retreating into the alley. By the time he reached the street, Sam was gone. A good sign. Sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of backup. The attackers, realizing they were outmatched, retreated to their SUV and sped off into the night. Anthony stood there, his breath heavy and his shoulder throbbing. The USB drive was safe, but the attack confirmed what he already suspected. Whoever was behind this corruption wasn't just powerful. They were willing to kill to protect their secrets. As the first patrol cars arrived, Anthony gave his statement to the officers and requested an ambulance for his wound. He knew the night's events were only the beginning. The USB drive held answers, but it also held danger. The fight for justice had just begun, and Anthony was ready for the storm that was sure to follow. Unearthing the truth. The dawn was cold, the air thick with moisture as Anthony sat in the FBI field office, staring at the envelope Eric had handed him just hours earlier. It sat on the metal table in front of him like an unexploded mine, a single unassuming package that could ignite a firestorm. He'd barely had time to clean the blood from his grazed shoulder, but Anthony wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the faces behind the attack, who had sent them, how they knew about Eric, and just how far they were willing to go to protect Councilman Glover. He couldn't shake the weight of their efficiency, their cold precision. These weren't petty criminals. They were professionals with resources. Rachel Myers, Anthony's supervisor and a veteran FBI strategist, entered the room with 2 mugs of coffee. Her sharp gaze lingered on the envelope before she slid one of the mugs toward him. "I hear you had quite a night," she said, her tone neutral but probing. Anthony didn't respond immediately. He picked up the envelope, testing its weight in his hand. If this is what Eric claims it is, then we're looking at a massive operation. Glover's connections run deep. Rachel leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "What makes you so sure? We've heard rumors before. Corruption, embezzlement. But no one's ever been able to pin anything on him." Anthony tore open the envelope carefully, revealing a small stack of documents and a USB drive. He passed the papers to Rachel, who began flipping through them, her brow furrowing with each page. "These are financial records," Rachel murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Dummy corporations, offshore accounts, massive withdrawals, and deposits that don't match up. This is a web of money laundering." "And it ties back to Glover," Anthony said, inserting the USB drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of folders. Anthony clicked on one labeled Contacts, revealing a detailed list of names, phone numbers, and meeting logs. Rachel leaned forward, her expression darkening. "These names, some of them are public officials, but others, these are known associates of organized crime families. If this is real, Glover's not just corrupt. He's in bed with the mob." Anthony's stomach tightened. That would explain the hit squad at the diner. Rachel nodded grimly. If Glover's working with the mob, they have every reason to shut down anyone who gets too close. Anthony clicked on another folder, marked Recordings. Inside were several audio files. He played the first one, his jaw tightening as Councilman Glover's voice filled the room. "Listen, I don't care how you do it. Just make sure the money's clean before it hits the accounts. If anyone asks, this was all above board. Understand?" Rachel's hand froze on the coffee mug. "That's Glover," she said, her voice low. "That's his voice." Anthony nodded. "We've got him. But we'll need more than this to build a case. We need to connect these records to specific actions, contracts awarded, policies influenced, and we need to make sure this evidence sticks." Rachel closed the folder of documents and exhaled. "I'll start the chain of custody. No one sees this without clearance. If Glover's got friends inside law enforcement, we can't risk a leak." Hours later, Anthony sat at his desk, poring over the evidence while the office buzzed around him. The financial records painted a picture of a sprawling corruption network that extended far beyond Glover. There were payments to construction companies, kickbacks to other council members, and under-the-table deals with organized crime figures. One name stood out: Victor Raldi, a known enforcer for the Castellano crime family. Raldi's name appeared in multiple logs, often listed as attending private meetings with Glover. Anthony's pulse quickened. If he could connect Glover to Raldi, it would blow the case wide open. Anthony's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing. The caller ID displayed a block number. "Agent Darden," he answered cautiously. There was a pause before a gravelly voice spoke. "You're digging too deep, Agent. Back off, or you won't like where this leads." Anthony's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" "You've been warned," the voice replied before the line went dead. Anthony stared at the phone, his jaw clenched. The call was a blatant attempt to intimidate him, and it only solidified his resolve. He immediately forwarded the number to the FBI's tech team, requesting a trace. Rachel appeared at his desk moments later, her expression tense. "What's wrong?" "I just got a warning call," Anthony said, standing. "They know I'm on to them." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "They're getting desperate. That's good. But it also means they're dangerous. You need to be careful." "I'm not stopping," Anthony said firmly. "Not after what they pulled last night." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know. Just don't let them bait you into making a mistake." Later that evening, Anthony found himself parked outside a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This was Raldi's known base of operations, a place frequented by Castellano associates. Anthony had brought backup, a team of 4 agents who were waiting in an unmarked van nearby. As Anthony stepped out of his car, the warehouse loomed like a silent monolith. Its cracked windows and rusted exterior exuded decay, but the faint glow of light from within suggested activity. He signaled to his team, and they moved into position. "Surround the building," Anthony whispered into his radio. "Keep it quiet. We need eyes on Raldi." The team moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the damp ground. Anthony approached the front entrance, his heart pounding but his focus razor-sharp. He peered through a crack in the door, spotting 2 men inside, one of them Victor Raldi. Raldi was seated at a table, speaking to a third man who was partially obscured by shadows. Anthony strained to hear their conversation. "You tell Glover this is getting messy," Raldi was saying, his voice low and gravelly. "If he wants us to clean this up, it's gonna cost him extra." Anthony's pulse quickened. He motioned for the team to hold their positions. He needed more evidence before making a move. The shadowed man leaned forward, his face partially illuminated. Anthony's breath caught. It was Glover himself. This was the connection he needed. Glover wasn't just dealing with the mob. He was meeting with them personally. Anthony pressed the record button on his radio, capturing every word. "You'll get your money," Glover said, his tone dripping with disdain. "But if you can't handle this quietly, I'll find someone who can." Anthony's hand hovered over his holster. He was moments away from bursting in when a sharp noise behind him made him freeze. A twig snapping. Someone was behind him. Before Anthony could react, a pair of hands grabbed him from behind, dragging him backward into the shadows, into the lion's den. The world went dark as Anthony Darden was yanked backward, his body twisting violently against the grip of his assailant. Instinct took over. He drove his elbow backward, connecting with something solid, eliciting a sharp grunt. The grip on his torso loosened, and Anthony spun around, drawing his sidearm in one fluid motion. A shadowy figure loomed in front of him, their face obscured by a black mask. Anthony didn't hesitate. With a quick, precise strike, he drove the butt of his gun into the figure's temple. They collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain. Anthony immediately scanned his surroundings. The warehouse loomed behind him, and faint voices from inside carried through the cracked door. His backup team was still in position, oblivious to the brief struggle outside. He keyed his radio. "Agent Darden here. I've been compromised. One suspect down outside. Proceed with caution." "Understood," came the reply from Agent Ramirez, the team lead. "Do we breach?" "Not yet," Anthony said. "I'm moving back into position. Glover and Raldi are inside, talking. I want to hear more before we make a move." Anthony crouched low, his movements careful and deliberate. He dragged the unconscious attacker behind a pile of rusted metal scraps, securing them with zip ties from his belt. Whoever they were, they had likely been acting as a lookout. The fact that they were caught off guard meant the others inside weren't yet aware of his presence. He returned to the cracked door and resumed his surveillance. Inside, Councilman Glover and Victor Raldi were still seated at the table. Their conversation had turned more heated. "You listen to me, Raldi," Glover hissed, his polished veneer cracking under the strain. "This isn't a negotiation. You clean this up, and you do it now, or you'll find yourself as expendable as the last guy who crossed me." Raldi leaned back, unfazed, a toothpick dangling from his lips. "You're in no position to threaten me, Councilman. You might run the politics, but I run the streets. And out here, people know my word is law. If you want our protection, you pay the price." Glover's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, the tension between them palpable. Anthony's mind raced. This wasn't just a casual relationship. Glover and Raldi were equal players in a partnership built on power and greed. It was a partnership Anthony was determined to dismantle. He toggled his radio again. "Confirmed. Glover is working directly with Raldi. This isn't just corruption. It's a criminal conspiracy. Prepare for breach on my signal." "Copy that," Ramirez replied. Before Anthony could signal the team, Glover abruptly stood, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase and slamming it onto the table. "Here," he said, his tone cold. "Everything you need. Names, addresses, even payrolls. You'll find your targets and handle them." Raldi's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the folder. "You're serious about this? You want these guys gone?" "I want them erased," Glover snapped. "They're liabilities, and I don't tolerate liabilities." Anthony's stomach churned. He didn't know what was in that folder, but it was clear Glover was ordering hits, likely on anyone who could expose the operation. If he didn't act now, more lives would be at risk. Anthony pressed the radio to his lips. "Breach on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." The door exploded inward as the FBI team stormed the warehouse, their movements swift and coordinated. "FBI, don't move," Ramirez shouted, his weapon trained on Raldi. Chaos erupted. Glover dove for cover, knocking over the table in the process. Raldi pulled a handgun from his waistband, but Anthony fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the wall, forcing him to drop the weapon. "Hands in the air," Anthony barked, moving swiftly into the room, his gun trained on Glover. Raldi raised his hands, his expression dark. "You've got no idea what you're walking into, Agent," he growled. "You think this ends here?" Anthony ignored him, turning his focus to Glover. "On your knees, Councilman. Now." Glover hesitated, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this," he spat. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Anthony replied coldly. "And that's why you're under arrest." As the team secured the two suspects, Anthony's eyes fell on the manila folder still lying on the floor. He picked it up carefully, flipping through its contents. The names listed inside sent a chill down his spine. Journalists, whistleblowers, even low-level city officials, people who had likely tried to stand in Glover's way. "They were cleaning house," Anthony muttered, passing the folder to Ramirez. "These are hit orders. Make sure this gets into evidence." Ramirez nodded, but his expression remained grim. "If this is what we found tonight, who knows what else is out there?" Back at the FBI field office, Anthony sat across from Glover in the stark interrogation room. The councilman's tailored suit was rumpled, and the once confident gleam in his eyes had been replaced with defiance. "You're making a mistake," Glover said, leaning back in his chair. "This won't stick. My lawyers will tear your case apart." Anthony leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You think so? Because we got recordings, financial records, and now those hit orders. You might have fooled the public, Glover, but you don't fool me." Glover smirked, but there was a flicker of unease behind his eyes. "Even if you take me down, you'll only be scratching the surface. There are people above me, people you'll never touch." Anthony's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." As he left the room, Rachel was waiting in the hallway, her expression a mix of satisfaction and concern. "We've got him, but he's not bluffing," she said. "This operation goes higher than we thought." Anthony nodded. "Then we keep climbing. If Glover's just a piece of the puzzle, we'll find the rest. But first, we make sure he doesn't see the light of day for a long time." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good work, Anthony. But don't let your guard down. If Glover's right, the people above him won't let this go without a fight." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "Let them come. We're ready." As he walked back to his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only the beginning of something much bigger and much darker. The tipping point. The FBI field office was a hive of controlled chaos. Agents moved through the hallways, arms laden with files and laptops, their voices low and tense as they discussed the night's dramatic takedown of Councilman Richard Glover and his associate, Victor Raldi. Yet, amidst the buzz of activity, Anthony Darden's focus was razor-sharp. He stood in the conference room, a massive evidence board looming before him, its surface cluttered with photographs, documents, and red strings connecting the web of Glover's corruption. Anthony clenched his fists as he stared at the board. Glover was in custody, but the councilman's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. "There are people above me, people you'll never touch." Rachel Myers entered the room, her tablet tucked under one arm. "Glover isn't cooperating," she announced, her tone grim. "He's refusing to say anything without his lawyers. And Raldi, he's stonewalling too." Anthony exhaled sharply. No surprise there. They're buying time. They know someone bigger is protecting them. Rachel nodded. "And whoever that someone is, they'll be moving fast to cover their tracks. We've got to stay ahead of them." She set her tablet on the table, bringing up a series of financial transactions. "The hit orders you recovered from the warehouse weren't just plans. They've already started. 2 whistleblowers on this list have gone missing in the past 24 hours. Anthony's stomach sank. "We need to find them. Do we have leads?" "Not yet," Rachel admitted. "But we flagged all the names in Glover's files. Local law enforcement is working overtime to protect as many as they can." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "If Glover won't talk, we go around him. What about Raldi's connections? His name kept popping up in Castellano family activity. Has anyone pressed him on that?" Rachel smirked faintly. "You want to play hardball with a Castellano enforcer? Be my guest." Anthony grabbed his jacket. "I'll do it." The interrogation room was cold and sterile, its walls bare except for a one-way mirror. Victor Raldi sat slouched in his chair, his arms crossed, and his expression a mix of defiance and boredom. He looked up as Anthony entered, raising an eyebrow. "Well, if it isn't the hero of the hour," Raldi drawled. "Come to gloat, agent." Anthony didn't respond immediately. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Raldi, his gaze steady and unyielding. "You're not as untouchable as you think, Raldi." Raldi chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? Guys like me don't break. You think slapping cuffs on me changes anything. I've got more power sitting here than you'll ever have." Anthony leaned forward, his voice cold. "You're a tool, Raldi. Nothing more. And when you're no longer useful, your bosses will toss you aside. You think Glover's protecting you. He's already working on a deal to save his own skin." Raldy's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. "Nice try, agent. But I'm not some scared kid you can bluff." Anthony pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. "This isn't a bluff. It's your life. These are the names of every Castellano associate we've arrested in the past year. Half of them cut deals. The other half, dead. If you think you're walking out of here without giving us something, you're dumber than I thought." Raldy's jaw tightened, but his defiance remained. "You think you can scare me with paperwork?" Anthony's tone hardened. "I don't need to scare you. I just need you to understand one thing. The Castellanos will kill you the second you're no longer useful. If you cooperate, I can protect you. Witness protection, a new identity. But if you don't..." He leaned back, letting the silence hang. "Then you're just another loose end." Raldy stared at Anthony for a long moment, his bravado flickering. Finally, he exhaled and leaned forward. "You want to know who's pulling the strings? Fine, but you're not going to like the answer." Raldy's confession sent shockwaves through the task force. He revealed the existence of a covert alliance between Glover, the Castellano family, and a powerful industrialist named Grant Westfield. Westfield, a reclusive billionaire with vast political influence, had been quietly funding Glover's campaigns and orchestrating his rise to power. In return, Glover ensured that Westfield's companies received lucrative government contracts, while Raldy's crew eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their operation. Anthony and Rachel pored over the new information, their expressions growing darker by the minute. "Westfield's name hasn't come up in any of our investigations," Rachel said. "He's kept himself completely insulated." "Which means he's dangerous," Anthony replied. "And smart. If we're going after him, we need more than Raldy's word. We need hard evidence." Rachel nodded. "Westfield owns several properties in the city, but his primary base of operations is a private estate just outside town. It's practically a fortress. High walls, private security, and top-tier surveillance." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Then we hit his Achilles heel. Every operation has a weak link. We just have to find his." That night, Anthony and a small surveillance team staked out one of Westfield's downtown offices. It was a nondescript building, blending seamlessly into the cityscape. But inside, Anthony knew, was the nerve center of Westfield's operations. Hours passed as they observed the building, noting the comings and goings of employees and security personnel. Finally, around midnight, a black sedan pulled up to the back entrance. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. Anthony recognized him immediately from Raldy's files. Martin Telford, Westfield's chief of operations, and a key figure in the corruption network. "This is our chance," Anthony murmured into his radio. "Move in." The team moved swiftly, intercepting Telford as he exited the building. He barely had time to react before Anthony pinned him against the car. "Martin Telford," Anthony said, his voice low and menacing. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and aiding and abetting organized crime." Telford's face went pale, but he forced a weak smile. "You've got nothing on me." Anthony smirked. "We'll see about that." Hours later, Telford sat in the same interrogation room that had held Raldy. But unlike Raldy, Telford cracked quickly. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a long prison sentence, he spilled everything he knew about Westfield's operations. Anthony and Rachel listened intently as Telford described Westfield's meticulous planning, his vast network of contacts, and the layers of insulation he used to protect himself. "Westfield's a ghost," Telford said. "He doesn't leave a paper trail, and he doesn't trust anyone. But there's one place he lets his guard down: his estate. It's where he keeps all his secrets." Rachel looked at Anthony, her expression serious. "If we're going after Westfield, that estate is our best shot." Anthony nodded, his determination unwavering. "Then we prepare for war. Westfield thinks he's untouchable, but we'll show him otherwise." The fortress. The air around Grant Westfield's estate was thick with tension as Anthony Darden, and the FBI tactical team crouched in the cover of dense foliage, a few hundred yards from the high walls that enclosed the property. The sprawling compound was an architectural marvel, modern and sleek, with sharp angles and gleaming glass reflecting the dim moonlight. But it wasn't the aesthetic that held Anthony's attention. It was the security. The estate was a fortress. Cameras monitored every angle, armed guards patrolled the grounds, and an electrified fence bordered the perimeter. A drone buzzed faintly overhead, its path circling the property like a vigilant hawk. Anthony checked his watch. They had been in position for nearly an hour, gathering intel and finalizing their approach. Rachel's voice crackled softly over his earpiece. "We've got a 30-minute window before the security shift changes. That's your best shot." "Copy that," Anthony replied, his voice low but firm. He turned to Ramirez, the tactical team leader. "We stick to the plan. We're in and out with everything we can find. If Westfield's here, we take him alive." Ramirez nodded. "Understood. On your lead." Anthony took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. Months of investigation, countless hours of legwork, and the lives of innocent people who had been caught in the crossfire. It all came down to this. "Move," Anthony whispered. The team advanced silently, their movements practiced and precise. They bypassed the outer perimeter by exploiting a blind spot in the camera system, a weakness uncovered during their surveillance. Anthony and Ramirez reached the base of the wall first, where a grappling hook was swiftly deployed. Within seconds, they were scaling the barrier, their gloved hands gripping the cold stone. On the other side, they landed softly in the meticulously manicured garden. The guards were nowhere in sight, their patrol routes timed and calculated to avoid this sector for the next 3 minutes. Anthony motioned for the team to split up. 2 agents headed toward the guardhouse to disable the security systems, while Anthony, Ramirez, and a 3rd agent made their way to the main building. The estate loomed before them, its glass walls revealing glimpses of opulent interiors. A grand chandelier hung in the central foyer, casting an eerie glow over the empty space. Anthony tapped his earpiece. "Team 2, status. Guardhouse secured," came the reply. "We've disabled the external cameras and alarms. You're clear to enter." Anthony nodded. "Team 1, let's move." They approached the rear entrance, a set of sliding glass doors that opened into the estate's expansive living area. Using a device to bypass the electronic lock, they slipped inside. The interior was silent, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and expensive leather. Anthony's eyes darted around, taking in the space, a pristine, sterile display of wealth that felt devoid of life. Ramirez checked the west wing. "Agent Kwan, take the upper floor. I'll handle the east wing," Anthony ordered. As his team dispersed, Anthony moved deeper into the estate. His steps were quiet, his breathing controlled. The east wing housed what he suspected to be Westfield's private office, a potential goldmine of evidence. The floor-to-ceiling windows provided a clear view of the darkened garden outside, but Anthony's attention was fixed on the large mahogany door at the end of the hallway. He tested the handle. Locked. Reaching into his pack, he retrieved a slim lock-picking set. The tumblers clicked into place after a few moments of focused work, and the door creaked open to reveal a room that was both a study and a command center. Books lined the shelves, interspersed with framed photographs of Westfield with political and corporate leaders. A sleek desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with files, a laptop, and several USB drives. Anthony quickly moved to the desk, pulling out a portable scanner and his own USB drive. He began copying files from the laptop while flipping through the documents. Bank statements, coded messages, and project proposals. All of it pointed to the breadth of Westfield's operation. One file caught his eye, a detailed ledger labeled Project Olympus. The document outlined payments to various officials, descriptions of illegal land acquisitions, and directives for silencing whistleblowers. Anthony's chest tightened as he realized the scope of Westfield's corruption. This wasn't just about Glover or the Castellano family. Westfield's network was a machine, grinding up anyone who opposed it. "Agent Darden, we've got a problem." Ramirez's voice crackled in his ear. "Team 2 reports movement near the perimeter. Looks like a response team." Anthony's blood ran cold. "How much time do we have?" 10 minutes, max." "Understood. Fall back to the rendezvous point and prep for extraction. I'm finishing up here." Anthony's fingers worked quickly, copying the remaining files. He grabbed the physical documents and stuffed them into his pack. Just as he was about to leave, a soft click behind him froze him in place. "You're a long way from home, Agent," a deep voice said. Anthony turned slowly, his weapon drawn and aimed at the man standing in the doorway. Grant Westfield. Westfield was calm, almost amused, his tailored suit pristine, and his hands resting casually at his sides. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Not many people get this far." "Hands where I can see them," Anthony ordered. Westfield smiled faintly. "And what happens if I don't? You think taking me in will solve anything? You're fighting a war you can't win. Agent, cut off one head, and 2 more will take its place." "I'll take my chances," Anthony replied coldly. Westfield took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "Do you really think I'm the villain here? Everything I've done to maintain order. You have no idea how fragile the system is. Without me, this city would collapse into chaos." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Say your justifications for the judge." Westfield sighed. "I thought you might say that." Before Anthony could react, Westfield lunged, knocking the gun from Anthony's hand. The 2 men grappled, their struggle crashing into the desk and sending papers flying. Westfield was strong, but Anthony's training gave him the edge. With a swift maneuver, he flipped Westfield onto the floor, pinning him down. "Stay down," Anthony growled, cuffing Westfield's hands behind his back. The commotion had attracted attention. Footsteps echoed down the hallway as several guards approached. Anthony keyed his radio. "Team 1, I have Westfield. Need immediate support." "On our way," Ramirez replied. Anthony dragged Westfield to his feet just as the first guard appeared. Shots rang out as Ramirez and Agent Kwan arrived, neutralizing the threat. Anthony tightened his grip on Westfield and moved quickly toward the extraction point. The team made it out just as the perimeter erupted in chaos. More guards flooded the grounds, but the FBI team was already gone, their armored vehicle speeding away into the night. Back at the field office, Anthony sat across from Westfield in the interrogation room. The industrialist's composure had cracked, his arrogance replaced by a simmering rage. "You won't win," Westfield said, his voice low. "The system will protect me." Anthony leaned forward, his eyes hard. "We'll see about that." As Anthony left the room, Rachel met him in the hallway. "You've got him," she said. "And with the evidence you recovered, we'll bring his whole network down." Anthony nodded, his resolve unshaken. "It's not just about him, Rachel. This is about everyone he's hurt, everyone who thought they were powerless. We're going to finish this." And for the first time, Anthony felt the weight of justice tipping in his favor. But he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The storm was still raging, and he was ready to face it. The gathering storm. Anthony didn't get much time to revel in the victory of bringing in Grant Westfield. The evidence they had recovered painted a grim picture. Westfield's empire wasn't just vast. It was intricately woven into the fabric of the city's economy and politics. Taking him down wasn't going to dismantle the network overnight. It was just the first step in a much larger battle. Back at his desk, Anthony sifted through the recovered files. Each document seemed to expose another layer of corruption, yet it also raised new questions. Rachel joined him, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her expression as grim as his. "We've analyzed the ledger for Project Olympus," she said, sliding a printed copy onto his desk. "It's worse than we thought." Anthony took a sip of coffee, then scanned the document. The project wasn't just about money laundering or bribes. It detailed a sprawling plan to gentrify entire neighborhoods, displacing thousands of residents under the guise of urban renewal. The Castellano family had been contracted to handle resistance, violently if necessary. Anthony clenched his fists. So it's not just a power play. They're wiping out entire communities. Rachel nodded, and Westfield's influence goes higher than we anticipated. He's got allies in the state government, corporate partners, and even a few federal connections. Which means this isn't just about taking him down, Anthony said. We have to dismantle the whole network, piece by piece. Rachel sighed, sitting on the edge of his desk. The good news is, Westfield's rattled. He might think he's untouchable, but the cracks are showing. If we keep pushing, he might lead us to the rest of his allies. Anthony nodded. What's next? Rachel handed him another file. Telford. He's still talking. He claims there's a secondary location, a safe house where Westfield keeps backups of everything. Ledgers, communications, blackmail material. If we can get our hands on that, it could be the final nail in the coffin. Anthony skimmed the file. The safe house was a high-rise apartment in the heart of the financial district, registered under a shell corporation. It was guarded, but not as heavily as the estate. When do we move? Tonight, Rachel replied. But we'll need to be fast. Westfield's allies will be on high alert after his arrest. If they think we're closing in, they'll burn everything. Anthony exhaled, preparing himself mentally. Let's finish this. The safe house. The high-rise loomed over the city like a silent sentinel, its glass windows reflecting the golden glow of the streetlights below. Anthony and his team were stationed in an unmarked van a block away, finalizing their strategy. The building has minimal security, Ramirez explained, pointing to a schematic on his tablet. No guards in the lobby, just cameras and access control. The safe house is on the 27th floor. Once we're inside, we'll need to bypass a biometric lock to access the room. Do we know what's inside? Anthony asked. Ramirez shook his head. Telford claims it's Westfield's digital archive. Servers, hard drives, and physical backups. If he's telling the truth, it's a gold mine. Anthony nodded. We stick to the plan. Quiet and efficient. No room for errors. The team moved out, entering the high-rise through a service entrance. The lobby was empty, save for the faint hum of a security camera swiveling back and forth. Ramirez disabled it with a device that emitted a pulse of electromagnetic energy, leaving no trace of interference. The elevator ride to the 27th floor was tense. Anthony's mind raced through possible scenarios. They were in enemy territory, and if Westfield's people caught wind of their presence, things could escalate quickly. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a pristine hallway lined with abstract art and muted lighting. Anthony led the way, his steps silent against the plush carpet. They'd reached the door to the safe house, a reinforced steel barrier with a biometric scanner mounted on the wall. Ramirez, you're up, Anthony whispered. Ramirez pulled out a small hacking device, attaching it to the scanner. The device emitted a series of soft beeps as it worked to bypass the lock. After a tense minute, the scanner blinked green, and the door clicked open. Inside, the room was exactly as Telford had described. A high-tech command center filled with servers, filing cabinets, and a central workstation. Anthony wasted no time. He signaled to the team to begin collecting evidence. Quan, copy the hard drives. Ramirez, take photos of every document you find. We don't leave anything behind, Anthony ordered. As the team worked, Anthony focused on the central workstation. The computer required a password, but Anthony's experience with encrypted systems had prepared him for this. He plugged in a decryption tool and watched as the screen unlocked, revealing folders labeled Clients, Projects, and Contingency Plans. Anthony's eyes widened as he opened the Contingency Plans folder. It contained detailed instructions for evading prosecution, including escape routes, offshore accounts, and lists of compromised officials who could be blackmailed into cooperation. One file, labeled Targets, sent a chill down his spine. He opened it and found photographs and dossiers of people who had crossed Westfield, including his own profile, along with Rachel's and Ramirez's. The last entry was time-stamped just hours earlier. It read, "Initiate final measures if containment fails." "Ramirez," Anthony called out, his voice steady but urgent. "We've got a problem." Ramirez moved to Anthony's side, scanning the screen. "He's planning to hit back hard." "We need to move faster," Anthony said. He keyed his radio. "Rachel, this is Darden. We've confirmed the safe house, but Westfield has contingency plans in place. They're targeting law enforcement. We're extracting now." "Understood," Rachel replied. "We'll be ready for fallout. Get everything you can and get out." As they packed up the last of the evidence, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Ramirez froze, his eyes darting to the door. "We've got company." Anthony drew his weapon. "Quan, finish copying those drives. Ramirez, cover the door. No one gets in." The footsteps grew louder, and then the door handle rattled. Anthony's heart pounded as he positioned himself beside the entrance, ready to strike. A moment later, the door burst open, and two armed men stormed in. Anthony reacted instantly, firing two precise shots that dropped one of the intruders. Ramirez neutralized the second with a clean shot to the shoulder, sending the man sprawling. "Clear," Anthony said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Let's move." The team exited the safe house, leaving no trace of their presence except for the incapacitated guards. The elevator ride down felt agonizingly slow, but they reached the ground floor without incident. They slipped out through the service entrance and into the waiting van. As they sped away from the high-rise, Anthony looked down at the encrypted hard drives and files in his lap. They had what they needed to destroy Westfield's network once and for all. But the cost of the fight was growing, and Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. The reckoning. The FBI field office was unusually quiet for a place in the throes of dismantling one of the largest corruption networks in the city's history. The air was heavy with anticipation. Anthony Darden stood in the operations room, staring at the massive digital display filled with interconnected lines, names, and photos. At the center of it all was Grant Westfield, his smug face glaring back like a specter of greed and ambition. The evidence collected from the safe house was damning. Records of bribery, blackmail, and violence tied directly to Westfield and his network. Yet the final puzzle piece had fallen into place with the decrypted file labeled Dominion. Rachel Myers entered the room, holding a thick folder and wearing a look of grim determination. "We've cracked the Dominion file," she said, dropping it on the table. "It's worse than we thought." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Worse than secret hit lists and blackmail schemes." Rachel opened the folder, revealing a blueprint for a sprawling real estate project. Dominion isn't just a development. It's a full-scale takeover of the city's infrastructure. Westfield and his allies plan to privatize utilities, transportation, and even emergency services. It's not just about money. It's about control. Anthony's fists clenched, and they were going to use the Castellano family to keep everyone in line. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Dominion would put Westfield at the top of a corporate oligarchy, untouchable by legal or political means. This wasn't just corruption. It was a coup. Anthony took a deep breath. "We have enough to charge him and everyone involved. What's the next move?" Rachel's expression turned serious. "We're coordinating raids across the city. Every Castellano property, every political ally, every corporate partner, they're all going down. But Westfield's still the priority. His lawyers are trying to get him released on bail, and if they succeed, he'll disappear." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Then we stop him before that happens." The final raids. The city awoke to the sound of helicopters, sirens, and FBI agents storming offices, warehouses, and mansions. News outlets scrambled to cover the story as reporters filmed handcuffed executives, politicians, and Castellano enforcers being led into custody. The streets were alive with a mix of shock and vindication as residents watched the powerful finally face justice. Anthony and his team were at the forefront of the operation, leading the raid on Westfield's downtown headquarters. The skyscraper loomed like a monolith of unchecked power, its glass exterior reflecting the chaos unfolding below. Inside, the lobby was eerily quiet. Security guards, aware of the futility of resistance, raised their hands and stepped aside. Anthony led the team to the elevators, his weapon drawn and his mind focused. Westfield's office is on the top floor, Ramirez said, checking his tablet. Expect heavy resistance. He's not going down without a fight. The elevator ride was tense, the silence broken only by the faint hum of machinery. As they neared the top, Anthony glanced at his team. We do this by the book. No mistakes. Westfield has lawyers waiting to pounce on any procedural slip-up. The doors opened to chaos. Armed guards fired immediately, forcing the agents to take cover behind the thick marble walls of the hallway. Anthony returned fire, his aim precise. One guard fell, then another, as the team advanced methodically. They'd reached the massive double doors of Westfield's office, where the final line of defense awaited. Ramirez hurled a flashbang grenade into the room, the deafening explosion disorienting the guards. Anthony and his team moved in, subduing the remaining resistance with swift efficiency. Westfield stood at the center of the opulent office, his tailored suit immaculate and his expression unreadable. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he had sought to control. You're making a mistake, Westfield said as Anthony leveled his weapon at him. You think this changes anything. My influence doesn't end here. Anthony approached slowly, his voice cold. Your influence ends with a cell. Hands where I can see them. Westfield hesitated, then raised his hands, his smug demeanor never faltering. Do you honestly believe you've won? The system is bigger than you, agent, bigger than all of you. Anthony didn't respond. He cuffed Westfield and handed him off to an agent. Get him out of here. As Westfield was escorted away, Anthony turned to the desk. It was covered in files, ledgers, and devices. Rachel had been right. This was the nerve center of Westfield's operation. Every piece of evidence they needed was here. Start collecting, Anthony ordered. Leave nothing behind. The fallout. The days following the raids were a whirlwind. With Westfield and his allies in custody, the FBI worked around the clock to process evidence and prepare charges. The Castellano family, gutted by the operation, had been crippled, their enforcers and leaders either arrested or fleeing the city. But the fight wasn't over. Anthony sat in a packed courtroom, watching as Westfield's lawyer argued for dismissal. The defense claimed entrapment, fabricated evidence, and abuse of power. Westfield sat calmly, his confidence unnerving. Rachel leaned over. They're playing dirty. If the judge buys any of this, we could lose everything. Anthony's gaze didn't waver. We won't. The truth is on our side. The prosecutor stood, presenting the mountain of evidence recovered during the raids, recordings, financial transactions, and testimony from Telford and others who had turned state's witness. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case unfolded, each piece of evidence striking another blow to Westfield's defense. When the judge finally spoke, the room fell silent. Motion to dismiss denied. The defendant will stand trial. A wave of relief swept through the prosecution team. Westfield's expression darkened, the cracks in his facade finally showing. The quiet victory. That evening, Anthony returned home for the first time in days. The weight of the operation, the arrests, and the courtroom battle pressed heavily on his shoulders. Lisa met him at the door, her eyes filled with relief. It's over, she asked. Anthony shook his head. Not yet, but it's a start. She hugged him tightly, And for a moment, the weight lifted. The fight wasn't over, but justice was finally within reach. The city was beginning to heal, its people reclaiming their voice from the shadows that had silenced them for so long. As Anthony tucked his sons into bed that night, he couldn't help but think about the future. The battle against corruption was ongoing, but he was ready. The storm had passed, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. And that was enough. For now.